Hi everyone. So I'm back with another track breakdown today. We're going to be looking at a track called First Touch. This is also off my EP Rebirth, which has been out for a couple weeks on all platforms. Just wanted to say quickly before I get into things, this is a new channel. I'm creating this content just to get music out there and to teach you all maybe some things in terms of music production, mixing, creativity, composition, making tracks and finishing them and putting them out into the world. So I'd love it if you could give me a subscribe. That would be incredible. And feel free to write in the comments if you have any questions or general comments, thoughts, anything you liked or anything you want to learn more about or see more about in these videos. Very helpful for me to know that. So thank you so much, and let's get stuck in. So here I have the original session. I broke it up into several folders if you have a look at the screen here. I tried my best in this one to stay quite organized, so we have everything here. From the top, this is what I like to do in my sessions in general, is ordering the session sort of like from high frequency and kind of higher parts and that sort of thing down to the bass and the percussion at the bottom of the session. So it just gives an easy way to navigate the session as you're working. So at the top we have the leads, then we have keys, synth arps, synth pads. This track is also a synth pad, a little bit of strings, the bass, percussion, which is a huge folder, and then the kicks at the bottom. So yeah, taking you back to when I began this track, this was in March, I believe, of 2022. I was living in Lisbon, Portugal at the time. I had just come down with a terrible case of COVID. It was the worst COVID I've ever experienced. And I found myself inside, and there wasn't a lot of daylight. It was quite dark. I was fairly depressed, to be perfectly honest. But in those times, I find that turning to music is often my escape or my way to at least do something and be productive. So I started working on an idea, and what came out actually was something very bright and optimistic and very different from the way I was feeling, but it really lifted my mood, I remember at the time, and I remember actually dancing around in my apartment to the early sketches, the early ideas that were there. So at the beginning, I remember I had this first sound, and we can have a look at it, but I actually had an extremely long intro, and for the longest time this track existed in this form of a super long intro that gradually built just to have a look at the sound itself. So again, I started this one on the Prophet 6, same as with Awake. I want to say it was from the same sort of sound that Awake used. It was this plucky little pattern. I created kind of an arpeggio, a bit of a melody, and it sounded a little bit like this. So that's it. That was the beginning, the first thing that I had, and what I originally had was another bass from the Prophet 6, which I just added to this to create a bit more harmony. So the two together sounded like this. So I think maybe what's interesting to talk about on, it's a huge reverb as you can hear. It's not okay. Um, what's interesting maybe to talk about is this idea compositionally of having something that is static, like an arpeggio that's going through the same notes and it's continuing those notes, and the changing underneath that harmonies to give the shape of a phrase, right? And I think this is a good example where this happens because we have that main thread sound, which I mentioned in the beginning, the first sound I made up. But then there's a lot of other elements that come in that are harmonic. So we have the bass, and the bass already in the beginning, it's creating its own shape, right? And then there's a moment where the bass goes down to a key note. So it's here. So at that point, there's a synth pad that comes in that holds right here. And obviously the bass, that's something new at this point. So we have that da, which is the 2, I believe. And the 2nd degree, I mean. And we have the chord, held chord, and then we have this vocal stem, which holds the tonic. Right? So we get that. This is a classic trick. I mean, a lot of people do this, but it just sounds great always. If you hold the tonic, you can't really go wrong with that note as the held note because everything else, it just has an emotional quality, that tonic. You know, it's like it's reminding the listener of home, essentially, right? It's like this is home. It's always there. It's in the background. It's the thread, and everything else is sort of drifting away. You know, it's moving a bit further, it's going a bit down, and then it's building, but there's home that's still there as that thread. The other sound is a sound from a friend of mine, a stem that I turned into a little bit of a loop. I believe the original sound started as a recording of her oven. And then I just put a tremolator on it. So again, this creates a rhythmic pattern. And it's quite a crazy one, as you can see here, this rhythmic pattern. And if we have a listen to that in isolation, we can see what's happening there. So we get these elements coming together, things are building. The key thing here is that all these things are, you know, crescendoing through. We have the voice crescendoing through, we have that sound which really takes its time until we hear it. We have the bass, and we have this pad, right? So sustained elements with some rhythmic interest from the, you know, the kind of repeated notes, still keeping the thread there. And this really is, I mean, it's a thread. It's yeah, it's going through the whole track. You can see this is the whole track here, and never in the track do we not hear that first idea, which I think I've liked to do in my music quite a bit, but it creates a challenge because you need to really work on the mix and the arrangement such that that thread is not overpowering or it doesn't feel static. It doesn't feel annoying. There's different approaches you can. I'm not sure if I did it here, but you can add in the octave above, or you can pan things left and right, or you can bring things down in volume and then bring them up again. But that stays throughout the whole track, as you can see. So let's go back. That was the intro, and then at this point there's a break. So the reverb is huge, and that's very intentional, because without that reverb to take us over the edge, it sounds like a ridiculous hard cut, basically. And I mean, I can show you what it would sound like if that reverb didn't exist on that sound. So that's without. I mean, it still works in a way, but it doesn't have as much of the atmospheric kind of qualities that the track has when you get that reverb spilling over. And I always like, sort of visually speaking, if you imagine just kind of like sort of fog, sort of just flooding a room, the reverb kind of acts like that. So it just floods the room, and gradually it disappears, and what emerges, right, is that kick drum, just steady, and it's kind of like this pared back sort of groove, which creates this next section. Let's have a listen to this section. So again, there's another idea, this that kind of octavey sound, which again came from the Prophet 6, which fades in. So a lot of gestures or sounds that are built around fading in to create like a rise. Instead of like a riser, like shh, like we kind of hear. It's how to do that musically. So it could be with adding reverb to a kind of vocal loop, or bringing in more highs, or gradually fading in through volume, bringing in a higher octave. Like, all these different ways can be used to create crescendo and lead us into the next section. So if we think about, so this is sort of like stage 2 with the kick drum when it enters. We had stage 1, this is stage 2. We're going to go to stage 3 in terms of energy levels. Percussion wise, this is actually quite interesting. So this is a stem that I got from a friend of mine in Berlin, and he made this. Actually, no idea how he made this, but it's a kick drum kind of heartbeaty rhythmic pattern. But it's more of like sort of like a texture that fits around the kick. So if I play this in isolation. So as you can see, there's some echo boy on there. That just gives some more width, obviously gives some delay to the sound. There's a lot of EQ cutting out the low end here so that the main kick can come through. That's very important always when you're working with low end, to make sure that you're keeping space for what's most important. And usually you need to give a lot of space to the kick drum. in dance music, because otherwise you just won't want to dance, essentially. So let's look at the kick here quick, and then I'll also play it again back with the that little rhythmic pattern so you can see how those things go together. So what I'm doing here is I'm just showing you some of the things that were added to it and also bypassing certain things. The kick is very short. It's very kind of punchy and yeah, very round, very kind of like sine tone in nature. There isn't a lot of click at this point, and this was a point that I wanted to touch upon because I spent tons of time thinking about the kick drum and the clickiness of it, or the lack of clickiness. In this first section, it was really important to have the kick when it first appears as less clicky, because when the kick comes in here later, there's another layer of click that enters, and then when it really drops again, has to have more click. If you have too much of that high end, the click on the kick, then it can really sort of feel detached from the rest of the track. And especially when you have darker bass sounds, like very round, dark bass sounds, as we do with this funky kind of bass, the kick needs to match that kind of bass tone. And it's a more sort of just understated thing. It feels cooler, you know, when you can make a cool kick drum, one that sounds great, and kind of make it darker, have less of that clickiness. Personally, I love that. So if we listen, let's just stack things up together a bit here. So we got the kick. We're gonna bring in the Berlin sound, that pattern. Let's listen to those together. Now let's bring in the main thread, the thread sound. And it's a bit different than the main sound at the beginning. Same sound that's used, different kind of melody. So we have those things. I'm gonna just go in. So if we listen, for example, here, what's this one? Right, that one, yeah. So if we listen to, for example, the bass, funky bass, Berlin sound, and our kick drum, let's listen to the three of those together. So this is like the most important part of this section for sure. I mean, this is the core, and as I was saying, that's a very dark kind of bass tone, right? So the kick drum can't just be smacking at it. It's got to sit nestled in there as well. The other thing you might have picked up on is that the bass has a sidechain on it. So I very often am doing this. I mean, even if it's not like an obvious pumping sidechain thing, just from a mix point of view, it just helps to keep it out of the way of the kick drum. So sometimes I won't use it, but as you can see here, it is going on right now. So it can just sometimes help that grooviness, you know, in the track. Let's go to the next section here. So we got the offbeat Wind, I've titled it. And I'm just gonna play that for a second. So let's have a listen. Going into it, here we go. So remember, increasing the energy, we gotta go up to level 3. So what's happening in this section? I mean, it's the kick drum obviously has gotten more punchy, and that's due to this click coming in here. So if we listen to that, we get that nice attack, right, coming in. I use the second sound there just for the click. And I just removed all of that below 500 hertz. And then also adjusting here a little bit, maybe shaving it down, tweaking it as you wish, just to get that click. That's all that's happening there. So what's happening here, we had that sound, the Berlin sound, right? But now we're adding in some extra sounds here. So we have also this one. We have this one. So there's a little repeated ticky sound. And again, it's just kind of like keeping the sizzle, keeping the pulse. And it's sort of an evolution from the Berlin sound. If we listen to the Berlin sound, which is more kind of rhythmic-y, this one is just very steady. But the thing that I actually struggled with the most in this whole song was the offbeat noise. For whatever reason, I had a real hard time in getting the noise to sound just right to create the groove I wanted. And eventually I came up with this option. It could have been hundreds of different options, but this is the option I chose. So in this noise track, I've taken a very short section of this sample, transposing the sound by 3 semitones, adjusting the volume, and then adjusting the EQ on there. And then that's going with another noise track here, which is pumping into a sidechain. And that's got also an 8th tremolator on it. So it's basically doing the same thing as sidechain, giving that 8th pulse. There's a lot of EQ, kind of like a band pass, what's going on here. So we're cutting all the lows, we're cutting quite a bit of the highs. And we're also shifting the sound down by 7 semitones here. And then another little bit of like kind of mastering EQ on that sound. So what ends up is this. So again, the same kind of thing as I was talking about in Awake, the use of white noise to give body to the whole texture and to give a lot of energy to it. So if we listen to that without that noise, let's see what that sounds like. It's pleasant, but it's missing something, right? It's completely missing something. So when we get that back in, then we get the movement. you notice how that sound also, it helps the other sounds to serve their purpose. You know, it helps the bass sound funkier. It helps that big percussive hit to hit harder as well. And let's just look at that for real quick. So this is a combination of three sounds, that gesture, I can call it maybe. So we have a very, very short first sound that's layered. Now let me see here. We have that sound, we have this sound, and then we have this sound. So what's kind of happening here is, sorry, so that's the main hit, but there is a very quick little sound here which comes in right before. Let me bring this down so we have it together. So we have this little sound here, which is kind of like a and then we have the downbeat, right? So if we listen to that, and then we have these layered sounds. So you have this short sound, or these two short sounds, and then a decayed sound. So it's kind of creating a composite sound, I like to sort of describe it as. And they merge into one sound. So if we listen to those together. Right. This sort of like aesthetic, or this sort of, this sort of feeling, this comes a lot for me from my youth, from being very into 80s production, 80s music, gated snares, and I'll talk about that. We have gated snares here as well. And the music of, in particular, Michael Jackson, because, he'd have these explosive snares that, like, his body, he'd react to it when he danced, and I kind of really like to do the same thing. I like to think of, when I'm making this, if I'm going to be dancing to this, kind of like, what movement is this sound going to elicit, And in this moment, it elicits this kind of MJ movement, which is like kind of hitting your shoulders forward, popping off. So that's sort of what's going on there. We then go into the juicy section where all of the percussion kind of kicks off. Let's start with the kick. So down in the bass, we got the kick going on here. So kick with reverb, obviously, as you can hear. It's not very common in production in general, but in the 80s, again, if you listen to like Prince records, he'd have these kicks with these huge gated reverbs on them, and it makes them so funky. In this instance, having that big reverb, I guess it just worked in the mix. It felt like the kick had some more life to it, right? But it can be problematic to have reverb on kicks, because you're dealing with some dangerous territory in terms of EQ. So you have, if you're not doing it right, or if you're not cutting enough of the lows, you're going to get a lot of that sort of big reverby kick sound, and that's going to just clog up your bass area. So be very careful how you're going to use it. But sometimes it can be a great tool to give more body to the kick and to kind of fill out the arrangement or the mix. So let's look at some of the percussion that's coming in here, because I think there's some interesting things. There's that offbeat noise sound that's still happening. It's continuing through. So we have that going from here. So again, here it's more sustained, this offbeat sound. Before it was really choppy and just hitting those eighths. At this point, there's a kind of bed of white noise in the back, and then a bit of that offbeat sound as well. We also get the continuation of that tom sound. Also some hits from the modular open hat sound, which is here. little kind of snippets, right? Gives it some rhythmic interest. So the most striking thing here, I would say though, is the hi-hats. There's quite a lot of layers going on here. I'm going to break them down so you can see what's all happening. So this is probably the most prominent sound right now, or at this section, which is the typical closed hi-hat sound. And you get little spurts, as you can hear as well here. And those just kind of create they kind of burst out of the texture very quickly. You hear it also here. Little open hat. And in addition to that, we have the clickly hit, which is an old sound that my friend back in uni made, and I love it. I don't know, I always bring it into projects. So this one is a bit more of a kind of woody sound. There's the sidechain compressor on there, which is giving that pump. And when you're creating a section like this with all this stuff going on, you know, it's really important to think about what's going to be having no sidechain, like what's going to just be steady, and what's going to have that sidechain, because all those decisions and as these things all come together, it's going to influence the groove and if it feels groovy or not, you know. So we have those two together. And then there's this sound here. Which is basically like an offbeat hat, but with a bit of a little thud sound in there as well. Pan to the right. So we have the left sounds, that's on the right. This guy's in the middle. It's just very simple acoustic hat closed. And then we have also this sound, which is not quite a hi-hat as much and more of a sort of interesting rhythmic texture. And here, again, I'm using a combination of tremolator and echo boy. The tremolator is just on the 16th pattern with the square. I often like the square because it's just a really hard cut on the sound. And then the echo boy is an eighth dot, a dotted eighth. So that really influences the the rhythm as well. I love using those two plugins all the time. I use them super often. And they work really well together. So if we put those all together, we can have a listen in combination to, well, let me build it up so we get to hear each thing coming together. So this is the first sound. Sounds a bit crazy when it's on its own, doesn't it? Without the kick, because the kick really roots the whole track, you know. If we listen to it with the kick, then we can get a little bit more of a sense for how that all fits together. That's sort of the rhythmic backbone that we have going on in this section. And on top of that, let's have a look at what else is going on. So a lot of loops, a lot of pads, back to the original, not quite the original pattern, but the variation on the original pattern, which comes in as well. But let's just play this beginning part for a minute and then break it down a little bit further. So there's those hats and all that going on. Something else I didn't talk about is the gated snare, or a kind of type of gated snare. Again, a lot of layers of snare drum, as you can see. They're more kind of different sounds and maybe some real snares, but come together to make a composite texture or sound for that what's functioning on the 2 and 4 as a sort of snare. So I'll quickly play through here. We got this one. And we have this one. So those all together sound like this. Quite brutal, I would say. Definitely a lot of high attack, and in isolation maybe sounds too much. But when it's in the context of the mix, it should. I mean, the reason why it was mixed that way was so that it all kind of fits together. So that's that snare sound. We had those hats playing, little rhythmic shots, as I was mentioning as well. The bass with those bass kind of textures that fit around the kick. Sorry, the kick with the sort of textures that fit around, as well as the offbeat white noise. Obviously the kick drum, and what else do we have? So that's from the percussion side of things. And then here we have the bass, the played bass, the tonal bass, playing like this. Super kind of soft, subby, played on the Prophet, and there is Decapitator in there, a fair bit, to give some more saturation to the sound. There is, as you can see, there's a side chain, but it's not active. It's not actually active at this point, because I think what was important in this section is that we have a lot of this sort of rhythmic, percussion going on, but sustained sounds actually create like a real coolness, or a kind of suspended feeling to a section, and I felt like the bass really needed to have that kind of just steady sustain, because as the section develops, we're going to be getting more elements coming in that are also going to sustain and going to build up. This sound here is the pad sound. So that is paired with the bass, right? Those two go together. And then we have this theme, right? And this theme is basically the rest, apart from this this little sound texture it's going through. We have the leads, which is all DIVA, the DIVA synth, which was a recent purchase while I was making this track. I really wanted to get it because I was listening to this, well, you probably know Ben Balmer, and he turned me on to the synth, the DIVA, which is super versatile, and I was finding some really nice lead sounds coming out of there. So that's sorry, back to the other elements that are coming in here. So we have this new theme sound, right? So I was talking about, we have this one here. Which is just kind of a lower sound. And then the DIVA sound. So here's the DIVA. So again here, what was really important was the amount of cutoff, and it was really like even just one going to 70 would change the character and the feel for me. Like I was really trying to find that perfect number. And then as it evolves, it opens up, and that cutoff, I believe, gets adjusted a little bit. So, I mean, it goes up to 70, only one level there. But generally, that's the idea of opening up the filter, right? So, so that's sort of what's happening with this lead that's building in here, and we have multiple octaves. We have, well, basically this theme moving up the octave, or moving from a single pitch, which is here, to played in octaves and moving up octaves. And then we have the DIVA kind of taking on like this arpeggio at the end, which is added in there. So let me just show you those DIVA parts real quick. So that's when it's first repeated up the octave, and then we have it come back here, come back again. Played in octaves, those two octaves. So again, creating some interest, having, you know, different kinds of synth sounds here, different patterns. The reverb also, as you can hear, the DIVA, especially when it's up in that high range, it really like sparkles and it really opens up the track. You know, it works super well to give that like that really great crescendo that we're looking for at that point in the track. So yeah, so the DIVA, and then the other element that's important here is the vocal stem, which I'm bringing back from the very start. We haven't heard it until it comes back here. And again, here, this is taking that stem and transposing it, and kind of creating a bit of a choir behind the voice. And then finally, there is a noise sort of riser, sort of distorted-y synth pad that comes in as well. So let's look at the voice that comes in with the DIVA that I was just playing. So that's what's happening in the voice. Those layers you don't really hear as you do when I isolate it here, when it's in the whole texture, but it adds to it. It creates, you know, this sort of more complex harmonies. It does add to the overall sound. And yeah, this was just like getting all these things to come together at this point. And the other big part, what's happening here is the change in the percussion. So dropping out, as you see, the snare is dropping out at this point, and the kick drum also drops out right before the drop. So there's this moment here of kind of just like complete suspension, and let me just play into that so we can hear. So, as I was mentioning before, there's the Moog as well, which I played live. A lot of these things were kind of pieced in and kind of adjusted, but this part was really played live and adjusting the filter, and it just gives a bit more like live grit to the sound or to the track. I feel like, especially with electronic music, having some elements that are really played live can really help the track, because anytime you hear someone performing a track and it's their live performance, there's just that feeling of them in the room and it being that one time they played that thing. So that's sort of what I was trying to add here with this odd ode, it's called, this sound. And as it gets further, and then even further, so really opening the filter, and we have also obviously sidechain going on there too. So then we get into the final section, and here it's as I was saying, it's kind of like an anti-drop a little bit. So there is still the that little thread sound, and then the original melody at the very beginning, that comes back in, and there's certain like swells like here, this sound, and also my voice that comes back in, but chopped a lot more, so we get this kind of stuttery effect. And yeah, this is just kind of grooving, we're home basically, and we're just enjoying the whole groove. So if I play that in its entirety, or it's all the sounds together. So a couple things to note. The snare here, it's different than the snare before. It has more body to it. It has more of a live kind of feeling. And that comes from this sample here, which I recorded in an old studio in Berlin, just banging a snare like crazy with metal. So it sounds like that. So we get the snare sound all together as like this. Again, it's kind of a variation on the sort of gated snare concept. The other important part, which I mentioned before, but I can look back at that one more time, is the bass. So we talked about the 16th bass. There's also this bass, which I stole from an earlier track of mine called With You, which is just an 8th pulse. So if you get them together, and yeah, I mean, those are super important. If I take those out, you can hear what song sounds like without them. Boring, right? No energy. So, yeah, I mean, take out the 8th bass as well. Cool, but it still misses something for me. Like this 8th pulse just gives us a bit more body in that low end. So yeah, essentially that's then bringing back some of the melodic ideas coming in here. There's the vocal loop. There's that key first melody, this one. repeat of the main theme, and then we're done. So that's basically the track in its entirety. And yeah, it's the emotional high point of the album, so I really wanted to, get that all to feel right. We were talking about those stages of energy from the beginning right until the final moment. This is something I don't want to be doing all the time in my tracks. I think I do tend to do like these kind of long crescendos. Sometimes it's cool just to come right out with high energy and then drop it down and then bring it back again. But I do like the challenge, and I think this track really kind of called for it, in its shape. So that's it. Just let me know if you have any questions or if any comments. Feel free to put them in the comment section below. And again, if you don't mind subscribing, that would be super amazing. Every subscriber means so much, especially as I'm starting this out. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.